I'm coming from an engineering perspective tonight, but hopefully it's one that should be relevant to everyone. So let's start with a picture of a railway business. Pachyderm domesticus, sometimes known as the elephant in the room. A railway business rides on the back of a very large asset base, infrastructure, rolling stock, and so on. All three of these major functions need to be in sync, but business is seriously hampered if that large asset base isn't in good trim. It's a complex business. We had a spell a while ago when the mantra was to simplify rail. That's only possible to an extent. The inherent nature of rail is what it is. And I agree with one expert who commented, perhaps you need someone who understands the complexity of rail and knows how to capitalize on it. Now, don't get too hung up on the elephant analogy. I just want to emphasize the relative scale and the interdependence of the parts. I could equally well have used a picture of penguins on an iceberg, above the water, below the water, and so on. Nor is the analogy unique to rail. It could be applied to other large asset industries, such as electricity. But there is one major shortcoming in the analogy, and that's time. Those assets last a long time. They outlive fickle market changes, 5 to 6 year management cycles, and parliamentary terms. The penalties of poor decisions are usually with us for at least a generation, and usually much longer. So we need to tap into expert knowledge if we are to optimize decision making up front and in good time. Take 3. Rail has some particular competitive advantages. There's only time to touch on one of them tonight, and that's our energy efficiency. Ironically, our fuel efficiency also means that we don't have a case to replace rolling stock on the basis of energy reduction. Once again, we need to get it right up front. For example, New Zealand wagon design has a long history of continuous improvement in weight, fatigue design, and so on. And we need to fully utilise that expertise and corporate memory. We do the business a disservice when that innate knowledge is regarded as a hygiene factor rather than the business advantage it is. Take 4 is a very simple comparison of rail to other transport industries, looking at what we have to do within a business rather than just go shopping and have someone else do it for us. For example, if you're a trucking company, you can buy a truck off the shelf and someone else provides roads, regulation, certification, and so on. The comparison also reflects the greater scope of individual business activity and the extent of risk management. One of the big differences is the lesser extent of external scrutiny of rail from the outside. There aren't the rail pundits out there, and we're a small country. We also need to recognise that we're small on the world stage, so we're relatively more vulnerable to the loss of key knowledge and experience. Even when outsourcing is an option, we must still be able to field sufficient expertise to at least manage and preferably optimise those outcomes. The home business wears the penalty of any deficiencies. I've given 4 takes on the essence of rail in New Zealand. Here's a précis of their implications. All have implications for safety and business performance. In essence, we're reliant on internal expertise for safety and business efficiency without a lot of scrutiny from external pundits. So what does this mean for decision makers? What does all this imply? Obviously, I'm going to say that bringing to bear expertise in professional engineering is essential, but it's more than that. Organisations must have a connectedness and an effective nervous system for that to be effective. Here's one simple statement. Nicholas Davidson QC was the lead representative for the families at the Pike River inquiry. Afterwards, he spoke extensively around the country to engineering and other groups about what should be learnt from the disaster. Pike River might seem a long time ago now, but most of his insights were both specific and generic and would form something of a textbook on safety management and organisation design should he choose to write one. And that's my context here. He also talked about the need for appropriate skills around the board table, the risk of boards relying solely on advice from management, being aware of dislocations in hierarchical structures, and the need for respect from top to bottom in an organisation. But what if there is a disconnection from that essential corporate knowledge in a niche industry like ours? What if the engineering voice is bypassed or not heard? An example that's sufficiently in the public domain to touch on tonight is the North Island Main Trunk de-electrification proposal of December 2016. A deeply flawed proposal somehow made it through management, governance, and government. And some good people who objected found themselves casualties along the way. It's not my purpose to focus on failures tonight, so please take this in terms of recognising success factors and the opportunity cost when they're not there. Having mentioned an historical failure, I want to address the typical objection which is normally raised at this point. But that's all in the past, an all too common response. Move on, not relevant, nothing to see here, you're living in the past. Is it all in the past? Have we learnt? Have our systems learnt or been restored? Have the lessons learnt been retained? Are they alive? Are they viable? We are our ancestors. Today's best practice, codes and standards are born out of past accidents and experience. Without a healthy take on the past, there's no experience and no learning. Davidson again. You've got to have experience to assess risk. In his opinion, the warning of the past was lost at Pike River because of ideology and organisational dislocation. There's a big difference between learning from the past, shunning it, and living in it. This whakatauki or proverb gives a very helpful perspective on the intertwining of past with the present and the future, shaping our identity. It's how we go into the future that counts, fully aware and best equipped. So let's pull all of this together. How do we take the essence of our industry with its reliance on internal knowledge and apply that knowledge for best practice, safety and business performance? I offer you my conclusions. Engineering critical mass. I've talked about the long-term implications of asset decisions. We need good engineering from the get-go, not just a subject matter expert approach, which only lets the engineer out of the box when there's a perceived need. Whether the need is adequately perceived is the issue. And if not, there can be more time spent cleaning up afterwards than would have been spent on getting it right in the first place. In my experience, the biggest steps forward in the industry have been enabled or closely supported by sound engineering from the outset. Conversely, the most costly have been when engineering has been insufficient or late. The professional engineer is unfortunately becoming a less well heard and sometimes lonely voice in our industry and in others. I take this opportunity to encourage rail industry senior leaders and governance bodies especially to ensure that they can clearly hear the professional engineering voice within their organisation and the wider industry. Professional engineers also sign up to a code of ethics which obliges us to speak up on matters of safety and the environment, including man-made resources. Organisations need to recognise that obligation and ensure that they are attuned to it. To that end, I also take the opportunity to encourage sound governance of engineering activities. I've talked about how so much of industry knowledge is within it, and that we're a small niche industry with relative little scrutiny by external pundits. So, I propose that governance bodies should include a portion of membership appointed by staff or others within the industry. Nicholas Davidson told how after one presentation he was challenged that, but a good generalist will probe and ask questions. To which Davidson replied, but what questions? As he said, boards need experience to assess risk, to know what it might be. As I understand it, this is a common model in parts of Europe. So if you're wanting original thought, you'll have to listen to someone else. I'm talking about the whole industry, the whole rail industry. Yes, Kiwi Rail, and yes, it's a major part of that industry. But as the essence of the industry applies across the board, so do these recommendations. Now, in closing, I'd like to briefly tell you 3 reasons why I'm still with rail. Firstly, I've long had an interest in transport that goes way back, even before signing up for engineering. I joined the Institute of Transport while I was still studying. Some of the most satisfying roles I've had have been where there's been a wider business involvement, working across not only engineering disciplines, but operations, marketing, customers. If you like, the full elephant experience. Secondly, there's a strong values fit. Rail's ecological value and contribution to New Zealand Incorporated make it a most worthwhile industry. And thirdly, there's still so much potential to grow the industry. There are some great things happening. The recent value of rail study, promise of a more stable funding model, and major investment And we're about to hear more about some of that from Chrissy and Daniel. But to make the most of these opportunities and to better our safety and business performance, we need to sustain a critical mass of professional engineering. We need to ensure it has a voice and can be heard, and with enhanced governance structures to hear, heed, and utilise. So my thanks to the RTSA for this opportunity to share these thoughts, and thank you all for your attention. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.